I took care of her sick mother for years. Then I found out she'd left everything to her ex. The smell of lilies was too sweet, too heavy, like a lie dressed in Sunday best. We were at the Rose Hill Crematory, a squat gray building tucked between a shuttered diner and a veterinary clinic. March in New England was always cruel, but that day the wind was especially biting. It snuck past coat collars and sleeves like it had something personal against everyone mourning Ruth Thompson. I stood next to Carolyn, my wife, though that word had started to feel more like an obligation than a title. Her hand gripped mine like it was the only thing keeping her upright, but I knew it was more performance than grief. Carolyn had always been good at that, at showing people exactly what they expected to see. She sniffled softly as another mourner passed, offering condolences and a weak smile. I nodded like a bobblehead on autopilot. "She was a wonderful woman," someone said. "She really was lucky to have you both," another murmured. "Lucky, that's what they called it." I looked at the urn on the velvet-draped pedestal, a polished bronze thing, too elegant for the woman it now contained. Ruth had always been sharp around the edges, proud, mean sometimes, not in the way of outright cruelty, but in the subtle, cutting way of someone who never really approved of you but decided to tolerate your presence. The first time we met, she looked me up and down and said, "So, you're not Jeremy." I remember thinking, who the hell is Jeremy? I'd later find out he was Carolyn's college boyfriend, the one who could have been a doctor if he hadn't dropped out to hike through Patagonia or some such nonsense. I laughed awkwardly then, said something like, "Nope, just Lawrence." She blinked slowly. "Huh," she said. "You look like someone who doesn't know how to hang curtains." And that was the beginning of it. I spent the next 7 years trying to win over a woman who didn't think I was worthy of her daughter. And when she got sick, when the doctors started saying words like Alzheimer's and long-term care, guess who stepped in? Carolyn had a demanding job in corporate HR, client-facing, she always said, as if that explained why she couldn't come home before 8 p.m. I was a freelance graphic designer, which apparently meant I had all the time in the world. I cooked Ruth's meals. I gave her meds. I sat with her through episodes where she didn't know where she was or who I was. She called me Greg for almost a year. I never figured out who Greg was. And now here we were. Her ashes sat in a pot, and I stood with Carolyn like a loyal son-in-law, watching strangers pat her on the shoulder and say nice things they didn't mean. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even sad. If anything, it felt like we were burying a role I had played for too long. The caring husband, the devoted son-in-law, the man who puts family first. That man died long before Ruth did. When the service ended, we walked out into the wind. Carolyn leaned into me, still performing. "Thank you for being here," she whispered, like it wasn't a funeral for her mother. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on someone across the parking lot. A woman, blonde, perfect posture, expensive black coat, red scarf. She stood beside a silver Lexus, not quite part of the crowd but not hiding either. Her eyes met mine. She smiled, a small tight-lipped thing that made my stomach twist. Carolyn followed my gaze and stiffened. "Don't," she said under her breath. I raised an eyebrow. She was invited? Carolyn looked away. She showed up, and just like that, I knew. Ruth's ex-favorite, the one who used to send Christmas cards even after Carolyn and I married. The one with perfect nails and a degree in something impressive sounding. The one Ruth always mentioned with a wistful little sigh. Julia. I'd always hated her name, and I had a feeling she wasn't here just to pay her respects. 4 years earlier, the call came in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I was working on a product mock-up for a small bakery's website when my phone lit up with Carolyn's name. "She's in the hospital," she said, her voice already cracking. "My mom, she had a stroke." I pushed back from my desk. "Which hospital?" "St. Joseph's. I'm already heading there." I grabbed my keys without thinking. The next 48 hours blurred into antiseptic smells, beeping machines, and a neurologist with a monotone voice explaining something about the left hemisphere and motor function loss. Carolyn clutched my hand in that waiting room like a child who just learned monsters were real. "She can't go back to her condo," she said quietly. "Not like this." I nodded slowly. Then she can stay with us, at least while she recovers. I don't know why I said it. It just came out. The right thing to say. The only thing, really. Carolyn looked at me like I'd hung the moon. And so Ruth moved into the guest room of our modest 2-story townhome. Beige walls, an aging sectional, mismatched kitchen chairs. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. It had always felt just big enough for 2. 3 made it feel tight, especially when one of them was Ruth. She came home from the hospital in a wheelchair with a prescription list as long as a CVS receipt. Carolyn's job ramped up at the worst possible time. A corporate audit meant she was basically living at the office, so the care responsibilities fell to me, all of them. The morning routine started at 6 a.m. I'd wake Ruth, help her to the bathroom, brush her teeth, then coax her to eat something, usually soft scrambled eggs and oatmeal. "You call that scrambled eggs?" she said one morning, pushing the plate back with a grimace. "It's the 3rd time you've said that this week," I muttered. She didn't hear me. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. I washed her clothes. I changed her bedding. When she had an accident, and she had many, I'd clean the mattress, the floor, her. I'd drive her to physical therapy twice a week, speech therapy once a week, and the occasional checkup with her GP, where she'd complain that I drove too slow or too fast or didn't know the right route. "You should have let Jeremy help," she mumbled once in the car. Jeremy. Again. He had apparently helped install her storm windows once, back in 2012, and somehow that had earned him a permanent pedestal in her mind. I didn't yell. I didn't snap. I told myself, she's sick, she's scared, this isn't about you, and it wasn't. Not really. At night, Carolyn would come home exhausted, kick off her heels, and smile at me with tired eyes. "You're amazing," she whispered once, kissing my forehead like I was a loyal Labrador. I smiled back and told her it was no big deal. But it was. I was juggling medication schedules, adult diapers, insurance calls, and a woman who seemed to take pleasure in criticizing the way I fluffed her pillows. There were moments, quiet, painful moments, when I looked at her asleep in that hospital bed we'd rented for the guest room, and wondered if I was a better husband to her than I was to Carolyn. And still, I told myself this was good. This was right. I was being a good man, a good son-in-law, a good husband. This would bring Carolyn and me closer, strengthen our marriage, show her I was in it for the long haul. But as the months passed and Ruth's health plateaued, I noticed something else. Carolyn stopped asking how I was. She stopped checking in about the day-to-day, the appointments, the challenges. Ruth became a footnote in our marriage, a shared inconvenience delegated to me. Carolyn threw herself into work, and after-hours networking drinks and team-building weekends in Denver and San Diego. Meanwhile, I spoon-fed her mother applesauce. I didn't complain. Not once. That's the part I keep circling back to now. I thought I was investing in our future, laying bricks in a foundation that would hold us together for decades. Instead, I was building a house for someone else. And I had no idea who would end up holding the keys. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was home later than usual after a dentist appointment. The house was quiet. Carolyn had already left for work, and Ruth was usually asleep or glued to the cooking channel around this time. I headed upstairs to grab my laptop charger but paused outside Ruth's door. I heard laughter, real, light, happy laughter. It stopped me cold. Ruth hadn't laughed like that, at least not around me, in months. I leaned closer. Her door was ajar. "Jeremy, you still look like a movie star." Her voice was high-pitched, almost flirty. I blinked. Then I heard the response. A man's voice, smooth, confident, just slightly gravelly in the way some women find irresistible. "You haven't aged a day, Ruthie." I stepped into the room. Ruth was propped up in bed, holding her iPad. On the screen was a man in his late 40s, tan and grinning, with perfect teeth, and one of those half-zips that only real estate agents and golf dads wear well. His name practically hovered over his head in bold neon letters. Jeremy. Ruth looked up, startled but not embarrassed. "Oh, Lawrence, darling," she said, waving a hand at me like I was the waiter in a fancy restaurant. "Jeremy, say hi to Carolyn's husband." Jeremy leaned closer to the camera, gave a small nod. Hey man, thanks for taking care of our girl here. Our girl? I forced a smile. Of course. Glad she's feeling chatty today. Don't let this one fool you, Jeremy said, chuckling. She's got more energy than all of us put together. They both laughed again, like I'd just walked in on the last 10 years I'd never been part of. I excused myself politely, left the room and shut the door. I stood in the hallway for a full minute, letting the quiet hum of the house settle back over me. My palms were slightly damp, my jaw was clenched. Who the hell was this guy? And why was Ruth glowing like she just had champagne for breakfast? By the time Carolyn got home that evening, I had convinced myself I wouldn't bring it up. I didn't want to be that guy, insecure, petty. But when she kicked off her shoes and went straight for the fridge, the words spilled out anyway. Your mom was FaceTiming with Jeremy today. Carolyn turned, yogurt container in hand. Okay? Jeremy is in your ex-Jeremy. The one she thought I was when I first met her. She gave a small shrug. So, she was beaming. I've never seen her like that. It was weird. She misses people. Is that a crime? It just feels... I paused, searching for something more rational than offended pride. Like I'm second tier in my own house, in my own marriage. Carolyn frowned. Are you seriously jealous of a guy she dated 15 years ago? I didn't answer right away. Because, yes, maybe I was. Not because of Ruth's giggles or Jeremy's face on a screen, but because everything I'd been doing, the lifting, the bathing, the humiliating chores, they'd made me believe I was indispensable, vital, seen. But now, it was like I was just the guy holding the tray while someone else got the applause. Carolyn exhaled loudly, like I was being unreasonable on purpose. She's sick, Lawrence. She's lonely. Let her have something that makes her happy. I nodded, slowly. Sure. I didn't press further. What would have been the point? But that night, as Carolyn drifted off beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Ruth's words on a loop. Jeremy, you still look like a movie star. And his reply, you haven't aged a day, Ruthie. That little exchange clung to me like the scent of her perfume, outdated, cloying, and somehow still in every corner of my house. I wasn't angry at Ruth. Not really. I was just tired. Tired of being everyone's plan B. Tired of clapping from the wings while someone else got the spotlight. Tired of being the one people forgot until they needed their laundry folded or a ride to the pharmacy. In that moment, I didn't feel like a husband, or even a caregiver. I felt like the spare tire in someone else's life, always there, but only ever used in emergencies. The conference room smelled like old paper and stale coffee. Mahogany furniture, dusty blinds, and a ticking wall clock completed the bleak picture. If purgatory had a waiting area, it would look a lot like this. I sat beside Carolyn, our knees not quite touching. Her hands were folded in her lap, knuckles pale. Across from us, a man with steel gray hair and rimless glasses shuffled a thick stack of papers like they were ancient scrolls. Mr. Hemmelsley, Ruth's attorney for the past 25 years, looked exactly like someone who charged by the hour and had zero interest in small talk. All right, he said, clearing his throat and adjusting his glasses. Let's begin. Carolyn exhaled sharply. I glanced sideways. She hadn't cried much at the funeral, but now she looked ready to crack. Maybe the finality of the will was hitting harder than the casket ever did. Hemmelsley began reading in that slow, methodical voice you only hear from lawyers and auctioneers of human dignity. I, Ruth Eleanor Martin, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath. The first few lines were standard. The date, the notary, the reaffirmation of this being her final will and testament. Then came the list. To my daughter, Carolyn Elise Martin, I leave my jewelry, personal effects, and all photo albums in my possession. Carolyn blinked. That was it? I leaned forward slightly, heart starting to pick up its pace. Hemmelsley didn't pause. To Jeremy Maxwell Grant, I leave the remainder of my estate, including but not limited to my residence at 123 Laurel Bend, all savings and retirement accounts, and my full share in the Vanguard investment portfolio. There was a moment of silence so profound I could hear Carolyn's nails dragging across the fabric of her skirt. I stared at Hemmelsley. Excuse me, I said, voice sharper than I intended. Did you just say Jeremy Grant? Hemmelsley looked up, blinked slowly, and nodded. That's correct. The ex? I asked, already knowing the answer. The document specifies Jeremy Maxwell Grant, yes. I understand he was an acquaintance of Mrs. Martin's for many years. Carolyn turned to me, mouth slightly open, like her brain hadn't caught up yet. She left everything to him? My brain stalled. 4 years of sponge baths and adult diapers. And she gives the house to Mr. Movie Star? I ran a hand over my face, waiting for someone to laugh, waiting for the prank cameras to pop out, but Hemmelsley just kept flipping pages. Ruth had me draft this revision 18 months ago, he added, almost apologetically. It supersedes all previous versions. She was very clear. Clear? Carolyn's voice cracked. She was on medication. She wasn't thinking straight. I assure you, Miss Martin, Hemmelsley said gently. We conducted a full competency assessment before notarizing. Her signature, mental clarity, and intent were all verified. Carolyn looked like someone had just unplugged her spine. But Jeremy lives in Arizona. He hasn't seen her in years. I took care of her. We took care of her. I nodded, still stunned. I'm the one who wiped her mouth when she couldn't feed herself. I bathed her when she was too weak to stand. I put in grab bars in every damn room of the house. And she left everything to some guy who calls in once a month to flirt over FaceTime? Carolyn pressed her palms to her eyes. I noticed her shoulders trembling. Whether it was rage or grief, I couldn't tell. Mr. Hemmelsley folded his hands, the picture of dispassion. I understand this is a surprise. These situations often are. But I must remind you, this is a legally binding document. Any challenges will need to go through the proper legal process. I sat back in the chair, arms crossed, the room suddenly too small. I didn't know what stung more, the betrayal, or the fact that I wasn't surprised. Of course, Ruth gave her money to Jeremy. He was charming, unattached, a nostalgia-drenched memory with perfect hair and zero obligations. Meanwhile, I'd been the background music of her decline, steady, unappreciated, and completely forgettable. Maybe she'd never really seen me at all, just the guy who wasn't Jeremy. The legal meeting wound down in a haze. Hemmelsley offered a few pamphlets on next steps, and we left with our dignity more or less intact, but only just. Outside the office, the March wind cut straight through my coat. Carolyn walked ahead of me, stiff and silent. We reached the car. She didn't get in right away. She hated when I brought her the wrong soup, she whispered. But he gets the house. I nodded slowly. Sounds about right. We sat in silence for a few moments before I added, almost to myself, you know, I didn't do it for the money, not even for the thanks. I just thought, maybe it meant something. Carolyn finally looked at me. Her eyes were red but dry now, hardened. It did, she said, just not to her. We drove home with the windows up and the radio off. Not because we were angry at each other, but because we were each doing the math in our heads, not the kind with dollar signs, but the kind where you try to calculate how much of your life you gave away to someone who never saw the cost. The car was silent. Carolyn sat beside me in the passenger seat, staring out the windshield like she was waiting for the glass to shatter. Her hands were still, folded neatly in her lap, too neatly. We hadn't turned the engine on. The air was stale, heavy with what hadn't yet been said. I gripped the steering wheel but didn't start the car. My knuckles were white. Did you know? I asked, my voice low, controlled, almost too calm. Carolyn flinched but didn't look at me. No, she said. Then, after a pause that hurt more than it should have, not for sure. That was enough. Not for sure? I repeated, bitter laughter curling around the words. So you suspected? She never said it outright, she muttered, but she always talked about Jeremy like he hung the damn moon. Jeremy was so charming. Jeremy always knew what to say. Jeremy never forgot her birthday. She also said his cologne gave her a rash, I shot back. Funny how that didn't make it into the will. Carolyn finally turned toward me. Her eyes were glassy. You think this doesn't hurt me too? I don't know, I said honestly. Does it? Her mouth opened, then closed. She was my mother, Lawrence, and I was her caretaker, I said, my voice rising. Her nurse, her chauffeur, her verbal punching bag, and in return she gave everything, to a man who FaceTimed her once a month from a pool in Scottsdale. She always said Jeremy was a real man, Carolyn snapped suddenly, her voice sharp like a snapped wire, that he would have married me if I hadn't settled. I looked at her, stunned. You never told me that. She shrugged with a bitterness that didn't suit her. What would have been the point? I let out a breath, long and tired. You know what the worst part is? I'm not even angry that she gave him the house, or the money, or the damn mutual funds. I'm angry that I let her make me invisible. Carolyn didn't respond. For 4 years, I went on, I told myself this was noble, that it would bring us closer, that being the good son-in-law would mean something in the end. I shook my head slowly. But I wasn't a son-in-law. I was a placeholder, someone to open jars and scrub accidents off the floor. I thought I was helping. I thought I was seen. Carolyn turned toward the window again, wiping at her cheek. I never asked you to do all that, she whispered. No, I said. You didn't, but you never stopped me either, because it was easier to let me play the role than to admit your mother didn't respect either of us. The silence returned, but this time it buzzed, electric. Carolyn closed her eyes. You think I didn't see it too? The way she looked at you, like you were somehow less, and me, like I'd failed the moment I married you. I didn't answer. Her words hung there, cold and jagged. Finally she spoke again, softer. You're not invisible to me. I gave a sad half smile. Maybe. But you never told her that, and maybe I needed you to. Tears welled in her eyes now, real ones. The kind you don't cry at funerals because they aren't for the dead, they're for the living. I tried so hard to keep peace, she said, her voice cracking. Every day, walking on eggshells around her, trying to defend you without starting a war. But she always found a way to make me feel small, like she was the only one who really knew what was best for me. And Jeremy, I said, the name now tasting like vinegar. He was her golden boy. We sat there for a long time. Two people who had just realized they were grieving different deaths. Finally, I leaned back in the seat, staring up at the gray ceiling. I spoke not to her, not even to myself, just into the weight of everything. I don't regret helping her, I said. But I do regret how easy it was to disappear inside the job, to forget I was a person first. That was the most honest thing I'd said in years. Carolyn turned to me, her face blotchy and tired. So what now? I didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the ache of something cracking open. Maybe grief, maybe freedom, maybe both. It was 2:11 a.m. The kitchen was dark, except for the faint glow from the fridge light I hadn't bothered to close all the way. A cheap bottle of red sat half empty on the counter, its label peeling from condensation. I poured another glass and leaned against the sink, staring out the window into the black suburban night. The house was too quiet now. No oxygen machine humming, no clatter of pill bottles, no Ruth. And still, I couldn't sleep. I took a sip. The wine tasted like sour cherries and bad decisions. From the corner of my eye, I caught the edge of the calendar still pinned to the fridge. March, a big red X over the 15th, the day she died. The day we heard her say nothing to us, and everything to Jeremy through her will. Funny how a few sentences in a lawyer's office could unravel years of your life. My reflection in the glass was faint, barely there, like I was fading out of my own story. I didn't even flinch when I realized the wine stain on my shirt was from earlier today. I looked like someone halfway through disappearing. The flashbacks hit like bad weather. No warning, just a sudden shift in pressure. Ruth in the emergency room. That sterile stench of plastic and fear. I'd sat with her for 7 hours after her second fall, holding a vomit basin under her chin while she trembled and muttered about Jeremy's smile. Carolyn had been out of town, a girls' spa weekend in Napa. I'd texted her. She fell again. Probably overnight. Her reply came back 20 minutes later. You've got this, right? Of course I did. I always did. Another scene. Grocery store. Cart full of her low-sodium snacks, adult diapers, an economized bottle of lotion she liked for her poor dry elbows. I paid for it all without thinking. Carolyn's job didn't cover much. Non-profit sector passion, she always called it. So we lived off mine. I called it being responsible. She called it partnership. But the truth, I think she stopped noticing. I remembered cleaning Ruth's teeth once. She couldn't reach after the third stroke. She'd snapped at me between foaming toothpaste and coughs. "You missed a spot, genius." And I remember laughing, like it was cute, like it was love. I stared at the wine glass, now nearly empty again. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, a low mechanical exhale that reminded me how alive the house still was, even if we weren't. I took another long sip and thought, I'm IKEA. No, really. That's what I was. Not a man, not a husband, not a son-in-law, just a functional piece of emotional furniture, cheap, durable, easy to assemble, and always available in neutral tones. I blended, I adjusted, I held the weight of everything until I cracked. You know how people always say love is about sacrifice? It's not. Not really. Sacrifice without recognition isn't love. It's self-erasure. Love is when someone sees the effort and names it. When someone says, I know this cost you. Thank you, but no one said that. Carolyn said, you're good with her. Ruth said, not as good as Jeremy. Even I said, it's fine. I don't mind, but I did mind. I minded every time I swallowed frustration and called it patience. Every time I cleaned up bile and told myself it made me noble. Every time I paid for things with time and money and energy I didn't have, because that's what love is supposed to be. Except, it's not. Love isn't an endless unpaid invoice. It's not a job without benefits. It's not being a ghost in your own kitchen, wondering when exactly you stopped existing in the eyes of the people you gave everything to. I put down the glass and finally closed the fridge door with my hip. The darkness swallowed the kitchen whole, and in that dark, I whispered out loud, just to hear the words, I am not furniture. It was a quiet gray afternoon when I pulled into Jeremy's pristine driveway. His house sat on a tree-lined cul-de-sac in a manicured suburb just outside Chicago. A modern ranch-style home with large windows and an expensive-looking mailbox. The kind of place that didn't just say money, it whispered it tastefully. No ring camera, no gate. I didn't call ahead, I just drove. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, or why I was even there. But when someone drops a bomb on your life from the grave, and the person holding the detonation cord is sipping cappuccinos in a custom-built kitchen, sometimes you just go. I rang the bell and braced myself. Jeremy opened the door wearing jeans, a sweater the color of new cream, and a look of polite confusion. Lawrence? He blinked. This is unexpected. Yeah, I said, it is. He hesitated for a second before stepping back and motioning inside. Come in. The house was like a magazine layout, airy, minimalist, expensive in a way that avoided looking flashy. A vase of white tulips sat on the marble island, not a single dish in sight. Of course, he poured me water without asking. Of course, I didn't drink it. He sat across from me, resting his elbows lightly on the counter. I was sorry to hear about Ruth, he said gently. I ignored that. Did you know? I asked. He blinked. Know what? I leaned forward. That she left you everything. The house, her savings, the stocks, all of it. There was a long pause. Jeremy's face didn't move for several seconds, and then, genuinely it seemed, his eyebrows raised. No, he said quietly. Lawrence, I swear, I had no idea. I studied his face. Not for lies, necessarily. Just for anything. A twitch, a smirk. Something performative, but there was nothing. He looked stunned. I barely spoke to her, he added. She'd call sometimes. Holidays. She was always kind, but we weren't close. Not anymore. I sat back. I lived with her, I said, every day. I fed her, bathed her, cleaned up after her when she couldn't hold down food, took her to appointments, drove her to the dentist, to the hospital. I gave her 4 years of my life. Jeremy was quiet. And you? I said. You get the house, you get the legacy. He pressed his lips together and exhaled, then nodded slowly. I'm sorry, he said. Truly. I'm as shocked as you are. I didn't believe him, but I didn't disbelieve him either. That's what made it worse. He wasn't smug, he was just calm, composed in a way I couldn't touch. After a moment, he stood and walked to a drawer near the sink, pulled something out, a letter, sealed. "She mailed this to me last year," he said, holding it out. I haven't opened it. I didn't think much of it at the time. Thought maybe it was just an old woman getting sentimental. I didn't reach for it. He put it on the counter between us. "I can't keep all of it," he said then. "It doesn't feel right. Maybe I can set up a trust. For Carolyn, maybe. Or if there are expenses related to the estate. I don't know. But not for me," I said flatly. He met my eyes. "No," he said. "I don't think that would help you." "Would it?" I almost laughed. He was right. Money wouldn't fix this. I didn't even want the house. I wanted someone, anyone, to say you mattered. You were seen. Instead, I got courtesy and tulips. "I thought you were the villain," I said, standing. Jeremy didn't move. "And now?" he asked. I looked around his beautiful, sterile home, not a fingerprint out of place. "You're not," I said. "You're just the beneficiary of someone else's silence." I left without shaking his hand. The drive home was quiet. No music, no rage. Just that awful, cavernous emptiness that comes when you finally stop pretending to be angry and realize you're just sad. Jeremy hadn't lied. Carolyn might have. But me, I'd lied to myself the longest. The zipper whispered shut in the dim morning light. My suitcase sat by the bed, plain and obedient, like it had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. Outside the window, the sky was just beginning to shake off the night. That soft, pale blue that only happens before the world fully wakes up, like the day itself was holding its breath. I turned to grab my coat when I heard the bedroom door creak open behind me. Carolyn. She stood in the doorway in an old robe, her hair tangled, eyes puffy, not from sleep, but from whatever storm she'd been silently riding through all night. For the first time in a long time, she didn't look polished or perfect, just scared. "You're leaving?" Her voice was hoarse. I didn't answer. She stepped into the room, her bare feet soundless on the carpet. "What about us?" I exhaled through my nose and sat on the edge of the bed. "There hasn't been an us in a long time," I said evenly. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Isn't it?" I turned to face her. "You only ever wanted me when you needed help, when something broke, when someone had to drive, when there were diapers to change or errands to run. That's when we existed. In the shadows, in the labor." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "You're being cruel." "No," I said. "I'm being honest." Finally, silence. The suitcase handle clicked upright as I stood. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said, arms crossed, voice shaking. "I didn't know about the will. I swear. I believe you," I said, and I meant it. "But it doesn't matter, because whether or not you knew, you never saw it coming. You never saw me." She stepped toward me. "Just a little. We can fix it." I almost smiled. "You don't fix a ghost, Carolyn. You just notice when it's gone." I walked past her, through the hallway I used to vacuum every Saturday, down the stairs I'd painted 2 summers ago because she said the scuff marks bothered her, through the living room where Ruth once sat in silence, wrapped in a blanket I'd laundered every other day. Each room had my fingerprints. Each one would forget them by dinner. I reached the front door and paused. For a second, just one, I thought I might turn around, but then I opened it, and the morning hit me like a soft explosion. The air was cold, sharp, new. The light broke across the street in long golden angles, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then went quiet. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door gently closed behind me. No slamming. I left a note on the kitchen counter, folded once, no signature, no return address. Just 12 words. "You never saw me, not really. Now I see myself. That's enough." 3 months later, I was standing in a tiny kitchen, barefoot, stirring marinara from a jar and humming off-key to Otis Redding. The sauce was too salty, the pasta slightly overcooked, but the room was mine. The rent was ridiculous for a 1-bedroom, the mattress squeaked every time I moved, and the view was nothing but the back wall of a laundromat. And still, I was lighter than I'd been in years. No one was calling my name from upstairs. No one was shouting questions from another room, or dropping subtle hints about the trash not being taken out, or telling me I'd forgotten to buy almond milk again. No one needed me, and that somehow made me feel needed by myself. I plated the spaghetti without flair, just a cracked bowl and an old fork I found at Goodwill. Then I poured a glass of cheap red and sat at the counter. One stool, no centerpiece, no coaster. The silence was rich, not hollow, a kind of silence that wraps around you like a warm hoodie, not the cold kind that used to creep through our house like fog. For dessert, I had a leftover brownie from the diner across the street. I didn't even heat it up, and still, it felt like a feast. After dinner, I cleaned the dishes slowly, not because someone was watching, not because it was expected, but because I wanted to fall asleep with a clean sink and wake up to peace. Simple peace, the kind I hadn't known in years. Sometimes I'd wonder if Carolyn ever read the note, if she stared at those 12 words and hated me, or missed me, or folded it up and tucked it away in a drawer she never opened again. I didn't need to know. I didn't need revenge, or apologies, or some grand reparation. I didn't need Ruth's money or her house. I just needed space, to feel like someone whose time meant something, even if the only person who noticed was me. A while back, a friend from work invited me to a poker night. I didn't know most of the guys. I lost $10 and half a pizza slice, but I laughed until my stomach hurt. Last week I started painting again. I bought a little set of acrylics from a dollar store and painted a wonky city skyline that's now hanging on my bathroom wall. This morning I got a thank you card from a neighbor. Apparently I'd helped her carry a box last week and forgot about it. She wrote, "You're the nicest guy on the floor. Thank you for being kind." It wasn't a big moment, but it felt like something I'd been aching to hear for years. Recognition, not as a favor machine, not as the background husband, just as a man who showed up. It was a breakthrough. And I don't miss the house. I don't miss the eggs Ruth never liked. I don't miss being useful for everyone but invisible to myself. Now I cook for one, badly. I sleep diagonally. I sing with the windows open, even though I can't hold a tune. And I've never felt more like a person, a whole person. You don't always need revenge. Sometimes peace is the loudest goodbye.